Welcome back, everyone. Today we're continuing on with our skies, water, rocks, and trees. This is our final painting for our last class. And I've chose this one. There was a few options, but I'm going to go with this one. I changed the drawing slightly. I've got rid of the bushes here. And I had this rock extend it further out into the area, and I bent this tree. Oh, you can't really see the original, but that is made some adjustments there. So we are going to start with wetting both sides of the paper, and that's because we're going to do the sky and the water, which is important to get it very wet. It helps it stick to the palette as well. So I'm going to wet it a few times. You can use a sponge or you can use a brush, whichever you're most comfortable with. And we're going to make sure that it's really soaking wet inside the paper, and that will help us be able to continue on, although we probably don't need that much time to do this sky because I've got a pretty small piece of paper. This is only 1/8 of a sheet, I guess, so it's not very big, but it's a good size when you're learning. And you know, if you do end up framing it, you can buy some custom mats and still frame it in an 11 by 14. I do my mats at custommat.ca or the Mat Shop, either one. And they're both Canadian providers. They ship fast and reliable, so that's one option. If this turns into something that you want to frame, then you can just get a standard frame and a custom mat. Okay, so we are soaking wet on both sides, and now I'm going to mix the paint colors that we're going to use. I'm going to use my old mixing brush. I did not spray my palette beforehand, so I'm just going to do that now. Wake up all the colors there. So we're going to have, in the top of the sky, we're going to have some ultramarine. And then we're gradually going to go down to some cerulean. I don't think I have enough light here, so I'm just going to brighten it up a bit. Let me see if I can turn this one up too. Oh no, I'm changing the color. That's not really what I wanted to do. Okay, that's as bright as it will go. I think we're okay. All right, so cerulean. I'll put a bit more water on the palette so that we don't run out. And I want this to be probably a creamy mixture. Okay, so this is my sky color. And then I also have my clouds, which I'm going to take just a very tiny bit. Oh, I'm out of burnt sienna, look at that. Okay, so I think I'll take a bit of indigo. So this is kind of the gray inside the clouds, but I do need a bit of warmth in there too. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just grab some burnt sienna from my other palette. Hang on. You will see here that I clearly don't have enough paint, especially later in the video. So make sure you mix at least double or triple the size of the puddles for this part. Burnt sienna creates a nice soft gray. So I got a blue gray and a soft gray, which will probably work for my clouds. Now, The option here is to paint your sky first and go around your clouds, or paint your clouds first and then work on your sky. So the way we did it in class was we did our clouds first, and that's what we're going to attempt to do here. You have to leave plenty of white spots for your Okay, so my plan today is to do it a bit opposite. I'm going to do my sky first. Because I have a smaller sheet of paper, I want to make sure that I have enough room for my sky. Often it's done the opposite way, but we're going to try it this way and see how it goes. So my paper should still be pretty wet. It's not really blossoming out too much there, which tells me it's not as wet as I think it might be. So I got kind of a dry edge there. So a couple of strategies there. You can just wet the paper again with a light spray. It should be wet inside, but it doesn't appear that it's that wet right there. So I'm going to start with the ultramarine here. And now I'm seeing that it's a bit wetter. And you can leave some of these gaps where the clouds hit through. And now I'm going to go into my cerulean. So I want my ultramarine to be fairly thick. So I'm going to go back into that. It was a bit too watery, and actually I should change my brush. So into the cerulean here. What I see down here in the photograph is a lot of space for the clouds at the bottom, and I'm just going to put those in. I'm not going to worry too much about, I should worry about the top of this rock, but I'm not going to worry about too much more beyond that. And it's okay if these actually fade out a little bit at the bottom. You can also do that, you know, just fade them out. I'll come back with a bit of a stronger ultramarine. So I'm going to go up here again, and I'm going to put my paper at a tilt so that it's nice and wet still, so I'm not too worried about that, you know, creating some blossoms. And I'm just blending that cerulean and that ultramarine together as I go further down here. I'm making, because the paper's wet, this is going to dry quite a bit lighter. So that's why I'm concentrating on some real texture there. And here I think I'll do ultramarine as well. Very wet in that area. So again, I'm going to have to go in a second time, and then down into the cerulean, maybe a bit more ultramarine as we make our way down here. And then there's quite a bit more cloud. Now I don't want these two to look the same. So I like the idea that this went in here. And I could put a little bit of ultramarine at the top of that. So now we're just assessing the shape, and I'm getting a stronger mix of the ultramarine here. Okay, putting that in at the top. Rinsing my brush, going into the cerulean as I get down here. So there's a couple of clouds lower in the horizon here that I want to keep. This shape goes that way. This shape was supposed to go this way, but we don't want them to look exactly the same. So we're gonna, I think we're gonna go with that. And then once again, maybe I just have a little bit of cerulean. At this point, I erased the cloud in the corner, but I think it would be a better idea to keep it sitting in a corner. But I think that should do the trick. Maybe a tiny bit more ultramarine, just so you see that gradient that we saw on the other ones. Okay, and now I can put my cloud shadows in. Maybe I have a shadow going up here, some shadows there, over here. Okay, now these are just plain blue, so I need to get into the darker colors now. And it's okay if some of them touch the blue, that's fine. I like doing this with my clouds where you see kind of you see them going into the distance. Okay, and then over here, we're going to put some grays up here. A little bit of gray underneath the bottom of these. And what I can do here as well is I can take my flat brush, and if I need more clouds somewhere down here, I can just kind of scrape them out. I'm rinsing my brush, wiping it on my cloth, and making some clouds that way. If I don't like the shape of this, again, I can go in like that. I can make these blend up more. And the other thing I can do is I can make some of these more dominant. Maybe have some shapes inside the cloud, something like that. Let's try that here. We have one sticking out here that we can emphasize. And really it's just more looking at your picture and trying to see what does that need. Okay. I think this needs to come down more. This one looks a little bit odd with the two blobs in the middle of it. So I'm just going to add some more there and see if that helps. And as it starts to dry, you can go in with a drier brush by dabbing your brush off and making some of these spots just a little bit darker. Something like that. So it starts forming cloud shapes. And then we can take our brush, like so. I'm thinking maybe over here, we need a bit more gray in this area. So something like that. And we got two masses of clouds now. And I don't really like that because they look very singular. So what I can do is maybe take a Kleenex and see if I can join them a bit. Something like that. So now, another two masses of cloud just joined in the middle. Okay. Maybe we'll make this kind of go up this way. The trick is making them look different, so that's what I'm trying to get to here. This worked here fairly well. I don't want to repeat that on this side though. Okay, and I think I should spread this out more. Okay, that one's starting to look okay. And then we have to look at this one. So the other option here as well is to go in with your ultramarine blue just a little bit darker in some of these areas. So that help emphasize the edge of the cloud. It's still wet, so I'm still in good shape there. Okay, that helped a little bit over there. And I gotta make sure I keep this side different. Do not repeat it on that side. Okay, and then we have some cerulean here. So maybe what I do is this one, well, let's go up here and kind of emphasize that. And maybe we have a spot that shows through more there. Well, it's still looking like two separate clouds. Okay, let's go like that. Ah, that's a bit better. Okay. Just rubbing it. Okay, not bad. The other benefit is we have some of the tree highlights that are going to be on the white of the cloud. So I think we'll be okay there. So now our next objective is to do the water. And for the water, we want it to kind of mirror the cloud reflections. So I'm just wiping down the water with some clean water. And I'm going to do the reverse here. So I'm going to start with the cerulean in the background. And I can actually put the cerulean right into this landmass that's at the back, because actually you can put it into any of these landmasses. But because I want a little bit of atmospheric perspective there. So we're filling in with cerulean, and then we're gradually going to get into more of the ultramarine. But let's start at the bottom because we want to leave a little bit of white. And I don't mind if the bottom is darker. Okay, so we want this shape to come down, trying to mirror that shape. And then I'll leave a bit for the rock reflection as well. It's going to be nice and soft there. And now I'm going to join those two that I just created. So I'm going to go back into my cerulean. And I think there was like something like that. And that. In the value study, there's really not too much showing, but our cloud is a little bit different. So I don't mind showing it something like that. You don't want it completely white at the front. But I do want this blue to show a little bit. So the other thing you can always do is you can always turn it sideways and you can say, am I mirroring this enough? Maybe I can go darker there. And this looks like, well, the actual island is in the middle of that. But I think we're okay. I think that's a good enough white area within our water. Okay, so that's our sky. The only other thing that we could do, well, we've got some of these grays out, is to put a very light wash over our rocks. And the reason you'd even want to do this, I'm going to go back to that burnt sienna and my other plant palette, is we want to identify the whites in our first wash. So there is some white at the end of this rock. Let's add a bit more blue into there. Okay. There is some white on the top of this rock we're looking at. And there is some white behind the tree. Okay. So I just identified that. And if you want a hard edge, you can just go in with a Kleenex and wipe that out a little bit because the paper is still very wet. And then there's quite a bit, well, this might even be better. There's quite a bit of white in these rocks too, and it looks like there's different white shapes, if you like. So we can just put those in. I added this rock here, so who knows whether it's capturing the light or not. This would probably be darker here. This could be capturing the light, be darker there. I don't think this one is really capturing the light, but we'll leave a little bit of white there. It always helps to have some white in areas. And then back here, and especially here, we want it to be dark so that it starts identifying the rock that's underneath there. And maybe have a shape like that, something like that. A few areas here. And then this rock here, we don't really have a design for it, but we're going to go with maybe it's dark here because we don't want every one of these things that are jutting out to be exactly the same shape. Maybe it's dark in here too. Let's make it darker as it goes down there. Okay, so that should do the trick for that. So now we've identified our whites and we're good to go. That's our first wash. All right, it hasn't quite dried, but I think it would be a good time to actually do these background trees so that we don't have to do them so dark. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to mix up a color for the background trees. It's going to have to be quite a blue-green, so I'm using my cobalt in order to achieve the first color. And then as we get further forward, it's going to get a bit warmer, so I'm going to put in cobalt. Actually, this was cobalt teal that I used there, with a little bit of yellow. And then that is too green, so I'm going to add a bit more cobalt blue to that. I want it to be sort of a natural color, so in order to achieve that, go back to my other palette here for a second, is I'm going to add a little bit of yellow ochre to that, and you'll see it just kind of dyes it down a little bit. So it's not so, what's the word I'm looking for? Unrealistic. So we want it to be green, but we don't want it to be too bright. And then into those, depending, well, this one we probably won't put much in at all, but we can also put a bit of purple into this color and a bit of burnt sienna. For the variations of that one as we get closer with the trees. And I'm not really going to worry too much about representing rocks or cottages or whatever you want in the background here. So our first step is the furthest headland or whatever you want to call it. And here I'm just also testing out whether my paper, I want this to be blurry. So if my paper is too dry, which just seems like it's a little bit too dry, then what I'm going to do is clean my brush and just touch the very top of this with my brush. And that's going to fade it out. Now I did have a big pencil mark along there, so the pencil mark is probably showing more than the top of the trees, but if I rub it gently with a really skinny brush, that might fade it out just a little tiny bit. And put a tiny bit of that over there. So that is that mark. Now the next one in, I'm going to put some of this blue on it as well. But then I'm going to go in with this green mixture that we made. And I always like to have the trees go off the page, higher up. So we're just going to do the same thing along here. You'll see it's still quite a light mixture. It's not really that dark. But we are going to add a little bit of burnt sienna in it here and there, and a little bit of purple here and there. So that's going to darken it a little bit. So that's a bit closer. And again, I'm going to soften out the bottom here. When in doubt, soften it out. And I'm going to do the same on the top here. I'm just going to go along with a damp, clean brush. And then I'm going to kind of rub where the pencil mark is. Sometimes just this little bit of motion gets rid of that pencil mark that shows up there. So I think I could go a little bit darker. I have some neutral tint on here. And mix that in with the green. And just a little bit darker here and there on this. And then at the bottom as well. Okay. So that should do the trick. Not too worried about the reflection because it's far away. But I'm just softening out the bottom of this so we don't have a hard line. We do have a pencil mark though, so maybe we can leverage that just by putting a bit more gray here and there, maybe make it look like there's more of a shadow at the bottom there. I think that will do the trick. Okay, so on to this one. If that wasn't dark enough, this one I made much closer. So I'm going to mix a thicker mix now. Add a bit of burnt sienna into that. A tiny bit of purple. Okay, so that's a very gray green, but I think we can go with that. And then I'm going to add a little bit of gamboge here. So there's a brighter green. And between those two, we should be able to do it. Now the pencil mark over here is really pronounced. So I'm just going to try to scrub that a little bit first. Let me get, oh, looks like this one will do. So this is a pretty aggressive scrubber. But I think it's important that I get some of this out beforehand. And since there's already a coat of paint over top of this, it's not going to come out as easy as we would have liked, but you have to keep cleaning your brush, and then probably a Kleenex is better to wipe off the marks that you made. And maybe this is slightly dirty as well because it's putting more dirt onto the paper than it's taking off. And the other benefit of this is it will soften this line so that when we paint it, it is going to be soft at the top. Okay, hard to say which way that goes. We might want to show a little bit of rocks on this one, so before we start, I'm just going to do a tiny bit of gray here and there. Okay, don't really want it ending, so like that, and then I'm going to blend that up a bit, soften it. It's kind of got an abrupt ending there, so we'll also extend that out a little tiny bit. Okay, So now in with our greens. Let's start with our lighter green that we made here first. Throw that in. You can leave a little bit of a highlight around this branch if you like. Okay. And then here above this rock, it has to be pretty dark. We really want to highlight this rock, and it has to be much darker than we see anywhere else. Okay, and then I start making my tree shapes up and down. Okay. Try to leave some of that gray. Okay, maybe throw a bit of burnt sienna in here and there. Okay, back to this one. And then maybe highlight that branch a little bit. Okay. Now just go in with the variety of color here. The gray didn't end up showing up too nicely. The other thing you could do is just scrape out a little bit of the gray. You want to highlight here and there, something like that. That makes it look like rock as well. I'll probably do. And then above that, if you go a tiny bit darker, let's say above this rock, we're going to go a tiny bit darker above here. Blend in this green again. And it looks like the trees are above the rock, so that's probably good enough. And then the other thing I just want to do is soften the line underneath here. We're probably going to end up putting another coat on the water, so that will make everything look a bit softer along there. Okay, and this one doesn't look as soft as I would like it to either, but we'll figure out how to do that by maybe making the water fade out somewhere there. So I'm just really trying to soften that line. So that looks further out. You can even use a flat brush to do that. So it's really fading into the distance. We're not seeing the bottom of it. Okay, I think that helped a little bit. Okay, so next step, I think we go on to the rocks, leave the tree for last. And we have some of the colors for the rocks, but let me mix up some and then we'll talk about it. All right, so I took the colors that were on my palette, and this one I just added a tiny bit of pink to it. This one I added the cobalt and alizarin, and it's really quite purpley, really. So if it's purpley, it's a bit too red. In order to reduce that, you would add blue. Now it's a bit too blue, but it looks like a blue-gray. So then if I wanted to settle that down a bit, I could add a little bit of burnt sienna. And then I've got kind of a, if we mix this all together, I've got a nice mid-gray, I would say, if we could call it that. Here's just burnt sienna. Here's my neutral tint, and maybe some indigo is in there. So when I look at these rocks, they are not typical Georgian Bay rocks, because Georgian Bay rocks tend to have some pinks and oranges and stuff in it. So I think I need a few warmer colors. So I've got my burnt sienna. I might just try to make this one here a bit warmer. And then the challenge with pink is as soon as you add it, it really takes over. And I have a tendency to go too pink on occasion. But we'll see how we can go with this. The key thing here is we want to keep the white of the rocks. And let's just avoid the gray areas that we've already identified here. And try to focus on the darker colors to start, and we'll see how that goes. I'm going to take the tape off the bottom here because this is where my rocks are. Maybe I'll put it over here for now. The other thing you can do is you can wet your rocks, which is probably a good idea for us to. Let's treat them in sections. So we're going to do this one. This is closest to us, so it should be the most colorful, and it should. I like kind of mixing the warm and cools, but I already made one mistake, which is I didn't keep the whites enough. So this one is going off the page, so I don't want it to be too pronounced, but at the same time, it's, you know, bringing the viewer in, and it probably needs the most texture to it compared to all the other rocks. So I'm trying to leave that area, and now I want to add some texture, so I'm going to get a bunch of pieces of paper to correct or protect my painting. I'm going to cover this white, and then I'm going to add some texture to this part. Okay, I'm going to go in with some of that pink. Move this up a little bit. So the pink, maybe a bit more, and now it's way too much, so let's just add some cerulean to that. Ooh, way too much cerulean. So let's try that one more time. We'll go over here. We want a little bit of pink. Let's add some, I don't know if you can see that, but it's basically pink with quin gold. And I think that might do it. Let's try that. Yeah, so it comes out a little orange, but it's not bad. So that's not a bad texture for that rock, although I should probably put some blue into it. Let's go back, and I use one of these blues, maybe with some of that dark. Make sure I cover up my sky. Okay, all right, so that's the front. It looks okay, and then the other thing I want to do is just smooth out this so it's not such a hard line where the rocks are being highlighted at the front. So I'm just adding water and trying to keep that going. And then last but not least, I'm going to try to put these lines in darker. It's all pretty wet, so this is not a bad time to do this. Okay. And I can also just add additional texture if I think certain areas need it more. Okay. And we've got a good mixture of cools. We can't go in with our darker starks yet. So on to our next rock, which is this one here. Again, it's pretty gray looking. I like the lines in it. I like the fact that it's going up. So maybe we can imitate that a little bit when we do this one. And one way of doing that is to put the lines in with the water that you want there. You can also pre-put these in before you do your splattering. These ones are my favorite for doing textures, and this way we can direct it to where we want to go. So I'm just going to go down in here. And this is, you know, my first layer. I can go a lot darker here, but I want to leave some of this white that's here and there. So the other way of doing this is grabbing some more paint, thicker paint. Okay, so that's quite dark. I didn't really use ultramarine blue. I used a lot of cerulean, so I'm going to go around with the fan brush and put that in where I think it should be. And sometimes you'll see these nice white spots. Just leave them because that's going to work for you. I got a white spot here, just leave it and see where it goes from there. Obviously it'd be a bit darker down there. And I can go back here and put those in this rock as well because it's still wet. Helps. Actually, it's not as wet as I thought it was, but let's go like that. Now it is. Okay, so put those in. Okay, and now I need something like burnt sienna. I need to get some color. I would like it to be a bit bluer. Something like that. And I can kind of, maybe that's a bit too blue. I don't have that blue anywhere else, so either I have to put it somewhere else. I think it's the way the brush, I'm going to grab some orange out of here as well. Need to kind of neutralize that burnt sienna. And then these are the lines that I liked on the rock. Okay. And then there's a couple of rocks down here that need the top of them highlighted. I've got virtually nothing there. So now I'm going to get a bit more precise. This is not wet though, so I do want it to be wet. Not that wet, too wet. So I put that down and then I'm grabbing it up with my brush. So I just want some darkness here, but I want it to look kind of natural looking. Put that in. There's going to be a lot of darkness in this area. Okay, this is my lighter color. I can extend that up here a little bit. More water in my brush. Okay, this looked like it ended up being a very dark down in here, which is great. I can go with that. Okay, and probably dark there. I like the shape of that better when it was like that, but probably dark along here. These stripes. And there's not much color at the top, but we can put in some darker marks because where the sun is the brightest, the darks also look brighter. When doing the lines on the rock, you can also curve them over the edge so that it looks like the rock is going away from you. Marks here that kind of mirror the other ones. And these are all pointing to our focal point, which is the tree. Okay, I can try to identify some shapes here of rocks that might be along the ground here or along the shore. I don't want too many of these the same shape though, so I think I'm going to have to make this one into a smaller rock. Something like that. And now it's getting a bit muddy. But it's not too bad. Do some thinner lines. I'm holding the brush at the very end. And I'm just letting the brush decide where these lines should be. Okay. Darker paint. And sometimes when you see this, where it's dark and then it's light, that's a good spot to do one of these darker lines. This part here is going to get very, very dark, so I don't mind putting some darks in there. And then we can always give it a spritz to help those colors blend together. It's hard mixing the right pink here. So I think that's not bad. Put some of that in various spots. Maybe what I'll do is I will wet the top here in a few spots. And there I can put some more pink. These, I think there's the lines here don't look that natural, so I'm just gonna, when in doubt, rub them out. More pink down in here. Okay, I think that's all right. It looks a little funny at the top because it's white, but I don't want to lose the white. So make sure I retain these whites here, but I want some of that to blend in. Oh, here's another spot that I might want brighter. I definitely want these spots brighter. Okay, and then here, maybe just a few more darks. Because if we want this to look bright, we need some darks there. Okay. And we could also tilt that this way so they blend in. In other words, let the watercolor do the painting for you. Okay, I think that's good. It's one of the things I like about this color combination is there's lots of color harmony. Okay. Last but not least, a few darks in this area. Yeah, the challenge is showing the darks and the lights. You need to do it, but it has to kind of be very organic, so it kind of soft in a way. Yeah, where these are hard edged, it doesn't look as good to me. Although rocks are supposed to be hard edged. Before we start on the tree, I am going to try to erase some of this. I have the Eradicator by Billy Showell, and it's very soft actually, but short, and it might be a good strategy for getting rid of some of these pencil marks because they're definitely going to show up. But the first thing I'm going to do is go clean it and get some clean water. The other strategy is to wait till you're finished and then do this when you're finished to the lines that are outside of where you're painting. As an example, I can do this on these rocks because they have lines, but we're probably going to darken the water back here so that that is, we can highlight the top of that rock. Okay, so that is the question. If we're going to darken the water, do we darken the water now? I really would like this to dry a bit. So, and I think we can safely work on the top of these trees. So let's go with that and see how it goes. All right, so for our tree mixtures, I'm gonna move this over a tiny bit. Let's get it in view for you. For our tree mixtures, we are going to use a combination of yellows. So I have a really bright yellow here, which is a bit too bright. And in order to calm that down a bit, you add a bit of purple, because that is its complement. And it just kind of mellows it out. You could also add yellow ochre to that. And then we need some greens. You can use palette greens. I have a cobalt teal. Later on I run out of paint, so mix triple what I am putting here. Hookers, but I never use them on their own. I usually mix them with something. So if we take the cobalt teal and I mix it with that yellow and a bit of purple, and then more cobalt teal, then I'm going to get this color here, which to me looks like it needs a bit of ultramarine. So I'm going to get that color there, which isn't really a bright green, whereas this one over here, the hookers, is a pretty bright green, and I might not mix that with anything else, but let's just see how we go. I might mix it with a bit of Quin Gold. Yes, I like that color. It's kind of an olivey green. So let's try the Quin Gold with the cobalt teal. Whoa. Yeah, it's not bad. So I kind of like that. To me, those three colors are quite realistic. And then I like using a bit of orange here and there, but I have to be careful how much I use of that. It might be better off that I mix it. So let's mix it with this green. See what we get. That is a very browny green. Let's add some cobalt teal to that. There's another nice green. So all of those. So I'm going to stick with the the yellow I used here with a little bit of purple, the Quin, mixing with those, and then where we need to go darker, I'm going to have my purple handy, and I'm going to have my indigo handy. So those can be my colors that darken what I've got here. So the strategy for doing the trees that I like the best is to put dots on the paper, and I'm going to have my yellow brush. So this is my yellow brush. I'm looking at my yellow. I'm thinking I probably need more yellow. So I'm just going to mix a little bit more of that. That's super bright. Maybe too bright, I think, but I think it might settle down if I add a little bit of cobalt teal. Let's see. Whoa. Yeah. It's a bit bright. I think that was caused by the Quin. So maybe if I go back to this yellow. It's very green now. Let's add a bit more purple. So you can go back and forth and back and forth. So it's closer to what I had originally. And we might just use a little bit of this yellow over here in spots that I'm putting a separate tray of just my yellow, so that in case we need that. Okay, so what I like to do the most is to add little dots to the paper and then have the color blend from there. And I like to go in sections. So let's start over here. We have some blue there already, and in order for that, actually I need a smaller brush. This might work.